Hands shoved me into the back seat before I could shove the last envelope into my bag. Fear tightened the pads of my fingers around the stack of letters. Rain spattered the car roof like a second set of hands. A man barked close to my ear, and a gloved hand closed the door. "Keep her quiet," someone said. The word fear is what moved first. Fear made me fold my shoulders and press the letters to my chest. I had taken the post office because I wanted small, exact work. Stamps, a neat pile, a receipt folded in my planner. I had spent the afternoon filing returned notices in the leather day planner I carried everywhere. The envelopes were mine to carry home unread. I told myself order would be enough. When the men pulled me from the curb, I still had the fountain pen clipped to my palm and one receipt hanging from a bent corner. I smelled damp paper and lavender soap and the cold leather of the car seat beneath my coat. The car smelled of leather and a faint smoke that clung to the upholstery. A low voice filled the interior and I froze. Rishi checked the envelopes. A light tapped against paper. Rishi's fingers were larger than mine. He stacked the letters, paused, then slid a flap open. I shifted so my back pressed against the door. I did not answer questions. I rearranged the letters into neat piles while my mouth tasted of metal. When the man in the driver's mirror spoke, his breath left a fog on the glass. Not her. Geo it like a judgment, not a mistake. Lorenzo came to the back seat with the slow, sure steps of someone used to deciding things that broke other people. He did not rush. He did not smile. He laid a single palm on the seat between us as if to divide a map. He moved with the careful economy I would later learn belonged to him alone. He ordered Rishi to open another envelope. Rishi did, and a photograph slid free. A face I did not recognize, a name written in ink I recognized from my own childhood school notes. The photograph had been folded twice. The name under it was not mine. This ties to Marco, Rishi. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I held my breath without thinking about it. My fingers found the edge of the envelope and smoothed it as if smoothing could decide things. I do not like being touched. I do not like interruptions to my lists. I like the steady weight of a closed planner on my lap. Those habits stayed with me inside the car. I sorted the envelopes into even stacks, aligning corners, turning a small, trembling order into a border I could trust. Lorenzo watched each movement. He watched the way I held the pen between my fingers, the small scar on my eyebrow catching the warm streetlight through the window. "Who are you?" Lorenzo finally. His voice was low. My fingers stilled on a manila flap. "Elena Marchi," I said. I did not preface it with my life story. I said the name because the head of the organization had asked. I said the name because the sound of it anchored me. I went to the post office to file these. I tapped the stack. "They are mine." I file. I don't read the sentence was a fact and not an excuse. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "You file letters for whom?" he asked. The car felt smaller. Geo shifted in the driver's seat, and the engine hummed through the chassis as if it listened too. Rishi leaned in with one shoulder and shrugged in interrogation the way someone would lift a knife to test its edge. "Private clients," I said. "People send things to me to keep. I keep them in boxes." I tried to make the words plain. He tested them as if testing a lock. "I am careful. I don't open them." I meant it, and my hands folded faster around the paper, like a child closing a book before a page could be read aloud. When Rishi opened another envelope, tension on my left rose like a pressure. He found a folded address inside with a street name that matched a warehouse Lorenzo had circled red in his mind the week before. He did not need to say it. His fingers trembled slightly when he handed the paper across to Lorenzo. Lorenzo read the name, then the photograph, then the ink. His face remained neutral, but his hand tightened on the seat. The car turned into a narrow street slick with rain. I had planned a short walk home, a small ritual of sorting receipts and filing them into their assigned boxes. I had not planned for men in black coats. I had not planned for a name like Marco to appear in someone else's investigation. I had not planned for fear to be a physical thing crawling up my spine. Rishi tapped the photograph against his knee. "She isn't our contact," he said. "She was supposed to bring the package." His tone carried a calculation. "We take the package. We keep her until we know why the wrong woman had them." Geo kept his eyes on the road. His shoulders did not move. I did not argue. I had learned long ago that arguing with force made little change. I sorted instead, sorting let my hands be busy, sorting let me refuse to answer the louder question. Why would a set of private letters carry violence inside them? My fingers found handwriting I recognized, rounded letters, thin strokes, notes someone had pressed to paper with desperation. One envelope had a faint smear of something darker along its lower corner. At a rusted intersection, headlights lit a block of people stepping out from the sidewalk. A van cut in front of Gio. The air in the car multiplied. Men banged on the driver's door. Someone shouted a name that cut like a blade. Gio swore, hands steady on the wheel, and tried to make a U-turn. The van boxed the car. I felt my breath stop. The fear I had named earlier grew its own gravity. The men at the alley did not call out to me. They called to Lorenzo. Leather boots hit wet cobbles. One metallic slap sounded when a car door closed. A figure pressed a gloved hand to our rear window and looked in. He read the faces. Me with my envelopes, the men with their armor of composure. He barked in order. The van door opened and a man stepped forward with a gun. I saw the slide of his jacket, the glint of the barrel. My thumb left an indent in the paper. Lorenzo moved the way someone moves when speed is a matter of math, not panic. He slid his palm across the seat to my back, brief and precise. Down, he said. He pushed my shoulder so I bent forward. The letters went with me in a pile. Richie reached for the door latch and thumbed it down. The passenger window cracked and a hand tried to break through it with a crowbar. I did what I had always done with shock. I made order. I plucked the envelope with the smear from the stack and opened it with the pen's clipped nib, the way I would open a sealed bill. The paper inside had a single photograph and a name. The photograph showed a narrow doorway and a date scrawled in the corner. I recognized the handwriting on the back. One of the clients I filed for sometimes had the same loop on the Y. My heart beat fast enough to make the paper shake in my fingers. Richie snarled. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. I did not let my voice show the trimmer from this stack. I said it was open. I handed him the photograph. Lorenzo glanced. His hand tightened on the seat. He gave Richie an order that was a single word. Hold. 3 men in the alley moved like a single organism. They tried the passenger door. One shoved his shoulder against it. Leather creaked and the lock held. A metal battering ram hit our rear bumper. The alley smelled of wet stone and motor oil. Gio gritted his teeth and kicked the door into gear. Lorenzo's palm never left my back, but his fingers curled as if to count off threats. An assault followed that lasted a handful of loud seconds and one long second in which everything inside me went thin. One man pushed through the jam of bodies and reached for the back window. He twisted the latch open with his bare hands. A hammer cracked against glass. I felt a shard slice the edge of a letter. I bit air and tasted copper. Lorenzo sprang. He used his own body as a wedge, a shield. He moved with force that made the attackers stumble back. I moved with him without planning it. My hand found a loose envelope, and I shoved it under my coat as if tucking something warm to my chest. I reached for the car door and opened it, pushing out into the rain. Lorenzo was at my side like a shadow of muscle. Richie and Gio kept their places, blocking the van and grabbing the attackers when they tried to push forward. A gunshot cracked. It did not aim at me. It rang off a metal dumpster, and the noise sent a spray of rats scattering into the dark. Men fell in a heap. One of the attackers, the one with the crowbar, tried to run and Gio caught him at the ankle. Lorenzo pulled a small object from his pocket and used it with a motion practiced enough to be precise. The man made a sound and went quiet. The alley stilled. My hands vibrated. I still had the envelope under my coat. Lorenzo used the heel of his hand to close his coat and his face cut into a hardness I had not seen when we had first sat in the car. He turned to me then and his eyes searched mine as if looking for how much I carried. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said. My voice came out flat. I checked my palms for blood. My planner lay on the curb, soaked at one corner. Someone kicked it away from the puddle and it sparked a small, useless laugh out of me. I had never in my life wanted the day planner to be more useful than it was. "I file letters," I repeated. "I don't read them." Saying it again steadied me in a small, practical way. Richie came close and took the envelope I had shoved under my coat. He flattened it between his fingers and read it. "This is evidence," he said. "This connects Marco to the warehouse." He looked at Lorenzo and then at me. "Why did she have it?" he demanded. "Elena, why did you have this?" He spoke my name like a question mark and an accusation at once. I felt my throat close. I told them exactly what I had told myself at the post office. I file, I do not read. I told them the clients who left things with me paid for discretion and for order. I said the words with my hands still wet from rain but steady on the envelope. Lorenzo watched me while Richie talked to Gio on the phone. He listened to the words and to the static, and then he asked me to follow him to a safe house, a neutral place where questions could be taken in measured pieces. I could have refused. I had a small, stubborn map of refusals tucked inside me. I did not refuse. My choices had shifted from fear to a kind of brittle compliance. That was the second emotional change. Suspicion flared into fearful acceptance, then hardened into a focus on small tasks. I found myself choosing to cooperate because cooperation kept the immediate pain small. At the safe house, there was a lamp on a table and a single wooden chair. Lorenzo, a man at the door to stand guard. Richie sits with his back to the wall. Gio locked the door. The room smelled of strong coffee and the faint pepper of Lorenzo's cologne. They set the letters on the table in front of me like a medical tray. The light made the edges of envelopes sharp. Lorenzo spoke then as if he were naming an instruction. Leave them where I can see them, he said. Heat it without heat. Heat it like a decision. File one envelope. Show me how you do it. The request sounded simple until I realized it carried a test. Would I keep my rituals under their eyes? I moved to the lamp-lit table and sat. My hands steadied when the lamp warmed the skin of my fingers. Lorenzo remained in the doorway. He did not sit. He stood with his coat collar up, one hand at his side in a posture that made stillness look like intent. Richie watched me with an edge to his mouth. Gio had his phone out and watched the locked screen like a calm animal. I took one envelope from the top of the pile. I slid the paper into my fingers, feeling the grain and the warmth that passed from my palm. I opened the flap with the nib of my pen and extracted a single sheet. The handwriting was cramped and urgent. There was a name on the sheet that matched a client who had left something with me 3 weeks earlier. I read the line aloud because spoken facts weigh more than thought. It says, "Meet in the warehouse at dawn. Marco will be there." My voice remained flat. My hands did not tremble. Richie snorted, so she admits she had contact. He jabbed the air with a finger that did not touch me. Then she lies about it. He read the return address and the postmark. This was posted 2 days ago. Gio spoke into his phone and arranged a trace. Lorenzo closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them. He folded his hands once and let them rest on the table. I felt something small loosen inside. Relief came as a practical thing. Someone else knew details now and could act. That was the third emotional shift, from focused fear to a cold, cooperative clarity. But that clarity did not erase the ache of being at the center of someone else's map. I kept breathing in and out like counting steps. Lorenzo reached across the table and touched one envelope with the tip of his finger. The skin of his knuckle brushed the paper. "You filed for people who needed to hide things," he said. "Why would someone trust you?" The question cut practical and blunt. Why would they trust you with things that name people we are watching? I looked at him and named a fact that was smaller than trust but truer to me. "Because I keep things in order," I said. "Because people want their lives contained. I make boxes for them." My voice found a plain steadiness. It was not a plea. It was a statement that could be measured in cardboard and labels. Richie leaned forward. "Who paid you to store this?" he demanded. "Name them." His tone tightened. Gio stood without saying anything and crossed to the window. He pressed his forehead lightly to the glass and watched the wet street below. Lorenzo watched all of us and then looked at me. "Elena," he said, "I will find out who paid you. Tell me everything you can remember." The request was not framed as a demand, but it carried one. I read what I could. I gave names that matched faces that had paid cash. I spoke in short sentences. Dates, locations, the smell of certain envelopes that had perfume on them. I described a woman who had left a letter to be filed with ink that bled when it got wet. I described a man who had slipped a folded photograph into an envelope and not sealed it. Each fact was a small lever. Richie and Gio pulled on the levers and watched what happened. When I finished, Lorenzo stood and crossed to the small window. He watched the street and then he looked back at me. You didn't read," he said. "But you opened one in the alley." He paused. "Why?" The question was short but heavy. I wanted to give him a reason that was neat and that would make the danger evaporate. I touched the scar on my eyebrow, the one that had healed and left a pale line. I opened it because something in the photograph moved my hands, I said. It was as near to truth as I could make it. I explained how the paper felt under my nails, how the ink matched a client's slanted hand, how the date on the photograph matched a day when the client had called and cried. Those were concrete things. Lorenzo listened. He did not interrupt. He nodded once and turned away to the doorway. His shoulders were squares of dark against the light. You will stay here until dawn, he said. We will check the warehouse. If your name is involved more than you say, you tell us. He left the room slowly, the sound of his coat sliding across the threshold like a final statement. I sat at the table and filed one envelope into a small box. I placed the photograph inside, aligning the corners. My hand closed the lid. The motion was simple and exact. I wiped my palms on my coat. Richie folded his arms and sat on the far couch. Gio poured coffee and left on the small side table. Outside, rain kept falling in curtains. Inside, the letters smelled of ink and wet paper. When Lorenzo returned, he did not sit. He moved to stand in the doorway and watched me put a single opened envelope into the box and shut it. My action was small. It was precise. It was the only thing I had control over in that moment. I heard the soft click when the lid latched and felt something close to an answer settle in me. Richie spoke then. We will guard the box, he said. We will check the warehouse at dawn. Gio checked his watch. Lorenzo nodded. He reached out and, without touching me roughly, rested his palm at the small of my back. The gesture was protective and calm, the sort of placement I had seen before in other people's marriages or old photographs. Stay here, he said. I sat in the chair and the lamp light split the edges of the envelopes. I felt the day planner under my thigh and the fountain pen like a small rod of steadiness in my hand. I had been pulled from a curb with stacks of other people's words. I had been shoved into a world where names and photographs carried bullets. I had made choices. To open a letter, to hand it over, to file one away. The room grew quieter. Someone closed the outer door with a soft click. Before the dawn, I placed the single opened envelope into the labeled box with a careful hand and slid the lid shut. Lorenzo stood in the doorway and watched me do it. His eyes held something neither cruel nor gentle, but decisive enough to change my path. The last sound in the room was the click of the box lid and the faint rustle of rain on the windowsill. That was the chapter's close. A sealed box on the lamp-lit table, Lorenzo in the doorway, and the plan to go to the warehouse at dawn. The letter on the table had been filed, and filing had replaced my immediate need to run. I had given them a fact they could use. I had kept one small ritual. The choice was made and the door remained closed for the moment, behind us. They shoved me across the concrete entryway and yanked my shoulder until the last envelope slid from my fingers and splayed on the floor. Fear sat in my throat, so solid I found myself chewing it until my jaw ached. A gloved hand fumbled through the stack. A voice I did not know barked, "What is she carrying?" I said nothing. I was not built to answer that question. I had been in the back seat when the car stopped. Hands shoved me into the building before I could stuff the letters into my worn leather planner. Rain clung to my coat. Marco's boots scuffed the lip of the doorway, and someone else slammed the metal door behind us. The concrete smelled like old oil and the detergent Sophie used on the stairs, and in that smell I had the same reflex I always had. Arrange, alphabetize, shelve. That reflex had kept me small and functioning. It had kept me from opening things that would bruise me. Fear pushed my shoulders forward, and I let the practical motions come first. They named me like evidence. Keep her quiet, someone said in a voice I recognized from the back of the car. The phrase landed like an accusation. I pressed my palms flat on my bag so the envelopes would not scatter. My hands trembled. I tucked the lacquered cap of my fountain pen into a seam of my coat like an anchor. I heard the rustle of paper as the lieutenant shoved aside the top envelope. He read the name on the front and spat. "This isn't hers," he said sharply, and the room tightened around me in a new way. Marco held the flashlight steady in his mouth as if he were afraid to let his hands go. He moved quickly, efficient and impatient. "Marco," I said when I could, naming him because naming let me hold something steady. Marco's voice did not soften. "Don't move." "What's in the bag?" I slid the planner to the side. "Letters," I said. The single word was small and useless. It did not explain why the envelopes had a name that matched a wound I had never wanted to touch. Seeing my refusal to open anything, a lieutenant laughed and pinched the corner of an envelope between two fingers. The laugh died when a heavier step sounded in the corridor. Lorenzo entered like a silhouette cut from the corridor's warm, amber light, broad-shouldered, overcoat collar high, the chronograph watch catching a slant of light. He did not shout. He moved to the lieutenant with a single, ordered motion that halted the search without a question. He reached for the letters with the same economy he used on people. Measured, necessary, final. He did not look at me first. He looked at the stack. Give them to me, Lorenzo. The voice was low and even. It trimmed the officer's edges off. Marco's hands stilled and the lieutenant handed the envelopes over with an obedience that was half habit, half fear. Lorenzo closed his fingers around my letters, as if closing a case file, as if each envelope was something to lock away rather than something to read. He announced, without explanation, that I would remain under his protection. The sentence shifted the immediate threat into custody. It was not kindness and it was not pity, it was a claim. The word protection sounded like a sentence to me, and I felt anger cut under the fear, anger that I had been taken, anger that someone else decided what would be done to me. I reminded myself of how I had kept my life tidy. Lists, labeled boxes, a place for every letter I refused to open. I had planned for small things. I had not planned to be claimed. Sophia showed me to the narrow back room. She moved with soft, efficient steps and set down a kettle without asking. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon oil and starch. She put a mug in front of me and did not meet my eyes. "Do you want sugar?" she asked. Her voice was sympathetic in the way that paid attention to logistics rather than feelings. I let my hands do what they had always done. I took 3 letters from the stack and slid them into a worn box with labels I had written in my neat, slanted hand. Filing was the shield I understood better than conversation. My fingers rubbed the envelope's edges, counting them off like safety steps. Sophia watched, then folded her hands around the mug and asked, "Why letters? They are things I can't." I caught myself. The sentence stalled, a small jag in my practiced movement. My fingers continued to work. "They are the way I track people," I said finally, which was true in a way that made the truth less sharp. Sophia nodded slowly. "Some orders come with names," she said. She had been a housekeeper for a long time. Some things follow people. While we spoke, a phone in the kitchen buzzed sharply. Marco's face changed when he stepped out to answer it. He came back pale, voice clipped. "They've identified the car. A sweep scheduled for roughly an hour from now. If anyone's seen entering or leaving, they will check footage. We need to move her, or we get watched." Lorenzo listened, and then raised his hand to stop the motion that would have sent men to pack my bags again. We stay, increase the perimeter, 2 men at the corner, 2 inside the band, cameras off the street. Sophia, lock the back stair. Marco, you and I will sweep the perimeter. Elena, stay put. His decisions arranged other people around me like chess pieces. I felt the pivot of a different sort of control. Not my neat handwriting, not my boxes, but a protection that moved men and doors. Fear shifted into a brittle, resentful compliance. I let him order because movement felt better than being a problem to be catalogued. Marco cleaned the envelopes with his hands, flipping through them in a way that betrayed curiosity more than duty. When he slowed, I felt the air change. He tapped one envelope and said my name as if he were calling something distant. "Elena, this name, Vitti, are these connected?" Silence drew in around that word. That single name matched a scar in Lorenzo's face I had seen when we were first shoved together in Chapter 1. The word rearranged the room. I realized in a physical, hot way that a letter could make me more valuable and more dangerous the moment someone else saw a connection. My hands clenched. I shifted from fear to an anxious calculation. If the letters linked me to whatever had cut Lorenzo once, then I was not merely collateral. I was a compass. Lorenzo took the envelope from Marco and held it by its flap. He did not open it. Instead, he set it on the low table and looked at me. "Why didn't you tell anyone your name could be connected?" He asked. "I didn't know it was," I said. My throat was dry. I tried to make my voice steady. "Names on letters are from people who wrote to me. I filed them. I never opened that one." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "You file instead of read." The words were an observation, not an accusation. There was a curiosity behind them that made me uneasy. Why? I answered with a small factual sentence. Because when I open them, I have to feel what they say. I can't hold that and work at the same time. My fingers went to the fountain pen's scratched cap, rubbing it like a talisman. Sophia took a breath and said, "There are names that bring trouble, Elena. Filing doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it marks you." Her voice held a clear, practical edge that lacked pity. We had been sealed into the house less than an hour when the perimeter alarm sounded, a faint metallic note that Marco set down as if testing volume. Then there were heavy footsteps on the walkway outside and a thud at the back fence. We all went still. Every man in the house took a position. I stood because my body would not let me sit while people were organizing for an attack. Someone hit the back door with a crowbar. Sophia swallowed audibly. Marco hissed, "Move! Hallway now!" Lorenzo reached for me in the same motion he used to take up space. Palm flat along the small of my back. The contact was not loud. It felt like a command. I moved because he said my name, hard and brief, and because the hall was narrow and the attackers were impatient. They came through like a wedge, shoving men aside. I heard one shout, another curse in a language I did not know. The hallway constricted with bodies. Metal scraped against drywall. Marco barked orders, "Hold the line. Cover the door." I felt a hand at my elbow, and Lorenzo turned so his body covered the path between the attackers and me. A man lunged at the door with a blade. Marco shoved him back. The closest attacker tried to reach the table where the letters sat. I did not think. My body moved. I stepped forward, grabbed one envelope, and held it to my chest. The paper trembled in my hands. Lorenzo's arm wrapped around my shoulders, and his other hand closed over my wrist to steady me. "Give it to me," he said to the nearest attacker, voice low and clear. The attacker staggered when Lorenzo pushed him with a force that was kinetic, not theatrical. Two men fell at the sound of a shotgun being racked in the parlor. The attackers retreated with curses, dragging a man who had been pinned by Marco's knee. When the door slammed, our group collapsed against the hallway wall in a collective, ragged exhale. I gripped the envelope until my fingers hurt. Adrenaline made my voice thin. "You could have been killed," I said to Lorenzo. "We were ready," he replied. "You wouldn't have been seen if you hadn't." He stared at the envelope in my hands. "Who sent this?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. My habit rose up like a habit of breath. Organize, avoid, file. Lorenzo's presence changed the script. He was not a truce. He was a requirement. The hallway had been the arena where I could no longer pretend the letters were inert. The men had come for them, or because of them. The room's danger forced an inward change. I had to decide on reality rather than deflect it. After the attack, sitting on the parlor floor under a dim lamp, Lorenzo curled an index finger along the top envelope and broke the seal. He did not make a show of it. He folded the paper with care and read aloud the first line. "Elena, E," he said. His voice paused at my name. He looked at me long enough that I could hear my own blood in my ears. The letter was from someone named Matteo, a name I had not thought of in years. It spoke of a debt that had never been closed, of promises that had been broken in a cellar where a boy had been left to stand watch. The letter described an argument that ended in a fight where someone had been badly cut, the name Vitti spoken then like a verdict. I felt my chest constrict. I had filed this envelope to avoid the particular sting of knowing that my family's history had a jagged edge. Now, in Lorenzo's hands, it behaved like evidence rather than paper. Lorenzo folded the letter back along its crease and pushed it toward me. "Open one with me," he said. His voice had a soft clarity that made me answer before I could think. I slid fingers under another flap. My hands trembled, but not merely from fear now. There was a new movement under the skin, a pull towards something I had avoided. I read aloud, line by line, because reading aloud made the words objects we could move together. Matteo wrote about a day by the river when a boy had run and a man had shouted. He named a place where a ring had been lost and a promise had been broken. When I reached the end, I realized the letter clarified more than it accused. It named people by small details: the scar on the left cheek, the watch someone always wore, a habit of stopping at the corner bakery for coffee in the morning. The details matched a face I now knew too well. I had to shift again, fear into a stunned clarity. The letters were not just private sorrow, they were keys. Lorenzo's thumb tapped the table as he listened. "This is why they wanted the envelopes," he said slowly. "They wanted leverage. They wanted to know whether you were a link or a liability. They don't understand that sometimes people hold on to names without meaning to be threats. They keep writing," I said. I did not look at him. "People write to me about things I don't want to feel." I filed Matteo because his voice was angry and I couldn't answer it. I thought silence would stop it. The sentence came out sharp. I realized how much of my life had been ruled by small withdrawals. Sophia poured 2 mugs of tea and set one beside me. "You filing doesn't make the truth go away, Elena, it just keeps it waiting in a box." Sometimes the waiting brings other people looking. That night, after men inspected the perimeter twice, after Lorenzo paced with his coat collar up against the lamp glow and Marco whispered into his radio, we were left with the residue of the attack. A splintered stair tread, a boot print on the rug, and 3 letters fewer on the low table. The immediate danger had been contained. The emotional danger had shifted. Lorenzo sat close enough that the lamp's light caught his profile. "You are not safe because you avoid Elena. You are safe because we make you so. But you will have to make choices." His statement was simple. It read like a directive. I felt an urge to retreat into my old rituals. Filing had worked in small ways. It had kept me moving through days. But the envelope in my lap thinned the shelter. I put the opened letter into my hand and, after a moment, placed it into a different box, one whose label I wrote in a hand that was less neat, less certain. I closed the lid with 3 small taps that felt like attendance to the world rather than an avoidance of it. At dawn I stood at the windowsill with the new box. The house had quieted. Sophia moved about the kitchen, and Marco checked the locks for the 4th time. Lorenzo stood near the door, coat in hand, studying the street through the curtain's slit. He nothing for a long time. Then he did something that made the room tilt. He stepped forward and placed his heavy gloved hand over the box, where I had put the opened letter. The gesture was not possessive in a loud way. It was a steady, silent claim. "Keep your letters visible now," he said softly. "I will not have them hidden where I cannot find them." I looked at him. I could have said no. I could have insisted on my old rituals. Instead, I slid the box into the windowsill where the light could mark it. That small, altered ritual, placing reed paper into a labeled box with a different hand, felt like the first time I had answered a question instead of filing it away. When the front door clicked shut an hour later, as Lorenzo left with Marco to check new leads, Sophia touched my arm once. "If you need anything, you say my name," she said. The line was practical and surprising in its warmth. I nodded, and for the first time since being pushed into the corridor, the fear that had been knotted and immutable in my chest moved into something that could be acted upon. It shifted into a cautious tension that felt more useful than hiding. I had been forced to stop filing one way, and began a different kind of order. One that included names spoken aloud, decisions made with other people, and letters opened in the light. The final sound that closed the chapter of that night was not a reflective sentence. It was a knock, 3 measured raps at the back door that made me start and reach for the box. I held the lid with both hands and called, "Who is it?" The knock repeated softer. The house held its breath. The knock was a concrete event that left me with the choice of whether to open the door or keep the letters locked in the windowsill where Lorenzo's hand had rested. I waited. The knock sounded again, and then footsteps receded down the path, leaving the morning light to thin across the labeled box and the envelope inside it. Emotion root. Fear. Emotion shifts. Doubt to fear. Fear to brittle compliance. Compliance to anger. Anger to stunned clarity. Clarity to cautious acceptance. I slid the box back into place, shut the window, and set the fountain pen on top of the planner. The pen-scratched cap felt like a promise I could keep. I would no longer let filing be my only answer. The letters were no longer inert paper. They had names and consequences, and someone had decided, with a quiet hand and a low voice, that I would no longer be allowed to hide them away. Outside, the street was empty but for tire tracks and one distant delivery van. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and tea. I opened the new box again, touched Matteo's envelope, and with hands that did not tremble as much, slid it fully inside the lid and sealed it with a small piece of tape. Then I wrote a date on the outside and under it, a single word, held, That mark was not an ending. It was a choice joined to other people's decisions. The chapter closed on a concrete scene. The box labeled Lorenzo's glove mark in the dust of the windowsill. A knock faded on the path, and men outside moving in patterns I could not yet name. The next action would be decided by them as much as by me. For now, my world had been reorganized, less tidy, more dangerous, and held by hands that would not let go. Two gloved hands cracked the study door and a voice ordered, "Where are the files?" Fear tightened my throat so hard I could taste metal. I pressed the last envelope into the box with fingers that would not steady. The intruder barked again, nearer, and I heard shoes scrape the hallway tile. The central problem was sudden and clear. Someone had followed the letters and now wanted them back. I am Alina Marchi. I had been filing letters like a patient librarian for months, one envelope into one box page, creased edges facing the same way. Filing replaced every argument I could not bear. My ritual lived on the oak desk beside a lamp, my fountain pen tucked in the planner, the locket at my collar. Filing kept things tidy. Filing kept the past sealed. That morning after rain, the lamp was on and my hands smelled faintly of paper and lavender. I had not expected company. The voice at the door used Lorenzo's name once and then spat, "Empty the shelf." Now, I looked at the shelf at the neat row of labeled boxes. I felt fear deepen into suspicion. Someone knew enough to ask. I had been careful. I had not given anyone my labels. I had not let anyone read them. The thought that someone else had traced my handwriting made my stomach drop. The first external event came 3 sentences later when the door banged wider and Marco pushed in with 2 men behind him. Marco's coat was still damp. He moved like he belonged in the room and not like a stranger. "Alina," he said, "step back from the desk." His voice held command. I obeyed. Marco reached for the boxes and his hand paused on the one I had been filling. He smelled of oil and cigarette smoke. Marco is not gentle. He is the underboss who has shoved me before, a fact I had not erased from memory. I let my hand rest on the planner while Marco flipped the lid up. Another man, a courier whose face I did not know, scanned the labels. The courier's delivered look, sharp eyes, a courier sack, made me realize this raid was not random. Lorenzo stepped from the shadow in the doorway. He crossed to the desk with 3 even strides. He took one envelope from my fingers without ceremony and read the front. His eyes narrowed. He did not ask permission. He did not smile. "These stay, Lorenzo," with the low velvet that stops arguments. Marco answered with a quick, clipped, "We have a trace." They were followed to the gate. The conversation moved like a pulley. The stakes tightened. Emotion shifted from suspicion to guarded panic as Marco explained the trace. They saw the courier at noon. Marco, a man in a raincoat, took photos. They questions about parcels. They want them back. I watched Lorenzo's hand close on the envelope I had been holding. He folded his finger over the stamp as if touching an old wound. The fingers were sure. They gave me the first strange sense that someone else would hold my fragile things with the same care I pretended to. Rosa, the housekeeper, arrived with a tray of towels and a face that had managed calm all morning. They were at the gate, she reported to Lorenzo, speaking as if Lorenzo were a fact to be stated. Rosa's voice was small but steady. She moved closer to the vault corridor, and her eyes flicked to the boxes. "This one was out on the table this morning," she said. "It wasn't there when I locked the front." Her detail was precise. That piece of information shifted the room again. Now I suspected someone inside had given them a direction. I said, Who would know?" My voice came out thin. Lorenzo glanced at me, then at Marco. "That's what we'll find for now. We move them." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The command made people act. Marco barked the next orders. "Pack light, move to the inner vault. No one leaves the property." The plan assembled with the efficiency of a machine. We moved like a small military unit. Marco grabbed boxes. Rosa scooped the loose envelopes. I tried to continue the ritual, one into the box, smooth the flap, but Lorenzo's men were faster. The action kept my hands from shaking. Moving the archive turned my careful habit into hurried concealment. The ritual I had used to feel safe now showed me how little control I had. That realization hit me as we rounded the corridor to the vault. Outside the vault, the corridor smelled of old stone and lemon polish. The vault door was a cold piece of metal with a dial that clicked. Lorenzo ran his thumb along the groove of the dial as if feeling the number like a familiar name. Marco slammed the vault seal open. The sound of metal on metal felt loud inside my chest. Rosa placed the tray down and set a single envelope aside with a hand that trembled. The scene changed when Rosa handed me a folded envelope marked in handwriting I knew too well. The handwriting had belonged to the person I had accused and mourned for years. My hands wanted to refuse it. Instead, I felt curiosity pull me. Fear was still the root feeling, but curiosity and a small flicker of hope threaded through it. Emotion shifted again. Fear, suspicion, curiosity. Alina, Rosa, this was tucked beneath the ledger. I thought you might want it. Her face did not betray anything else. I opened the flap with a thumb that would not stop trembling. The paper inside was dense, with ink that had not bled despite the damp. The letter began with a name. A single sentence hit me like the slam of the door in Chapter 1. There was no long preamble. The line read like a fact I could not ignore. I did not leave you because I wanted to. I left because I believed it would save you. The paper carried dates, a place name, small details that matched moments I had been filing. The market on Via Sestri, the bite missing from a coin I kept in the planner. The confession mapped itself onto the boxes I had stacked for months. A twist had arrived that rearranged the blame I had carried. Lorenzo read the opening over my shoulder. For the first time since he stepped into the room, his posture shifted. The lean of his broad shoulders tightened. He folded the letter and said, "If this is true, it's leverage and it's danger." Marco's hand hit the table. "We can use it," he said. "We can bargain. We can—" Marco's voice cut off as the outer door exploded inward. The breach was the climax beat the outline promised. Armed men smashed through and rushed the vault. Men shouted, boots on concrete, the taste of dust. I was shoved to the floor. My palms hit cold stone. The envelope I had opened fell half from my hand. Lorenzo shoved himself between me and the intruders. He reached across my back and pushed me face first into the stone as bodies slammed past. He rotated, a practiced motion, and the heavy bulk of his coat shielded me. I tore the letter the rest of the way open while sand and dust slid into my mouth. My eyes skimmed the next sentence. It named someone I had trusted and placed blame on a decision I had kept filing. A transfer of assets, a forged note. The line reframed the reason a person had left years before. The revelation forced me to choose quickly whether to keep hiding or to make the truth public. I could hear the men moving closer. The letter made the choice concrete. "Lorenzo," I said, voice small but steady, "if they take this, they'll use it to hurt people besides me." I felt a pulse against my temple. Lorenzo's hand tightened on the stone by my head. "I know," he answered. "That's why it doesn't leave this room." His breath was close enough to fog the paper. There was no flourish in his voice. There was only a compact, iron decision. An internal shift occurred in the wake of the skirmish. The panic splintered into disorientation and then into a raw, honest relief when the attack faltered. Marco and Lorenzo barked orders. Marco shoved two men toward the doorway. Rosa pulled me up by the elbow. The intruders moved through the vault like aggressive wind and then slowed as Marco and Lorenzo redirected them with threats and looks that cost money. The intruders left with empty hands because Lorenzo made it so. After the men were gone, silence left residue in the room, a few overturned boxes, dust, a snapped shutter. Marco stood with his jaw tight. "They had a list," he said. "They photographed the labels. We don't know who hired them." Rosa sank into a chair and folded the towels in her hands like she was counting each breath. I sat on the floor and wrapped my knees around the letter as if hugging something fragile. I read the confession again because reading it changed how I remembered earlier accusations. That single sentence dislodged a long-held belief I had filed away, that the person who left had betrayed us intentionally. The new line said otherwise. My grief broke into confusion and then into something like relief, because the motive had been different than my filing had recorded. The emotion shifted another time. Fear, suspicion, curiosity, fragile relief. Lorenzo watched me. He did not say, "I told you so." Instead, his expression slid into something softer and unguarded. He removed his gloves with care and set them on the table near my planner. "You kept these safe," he said. "You did it because you could not face the papers alone." His observation was not a judgment. It was a mapping of what he had seen. I felt my shoulders uncoil just enough to breathe. Marco leaned in. "Pragmatic, we can use the letter." He insisted, "We can trade it." Or we can hide it and make sure no one copies it." The underboss's voice moved like a lever. He saw a tool and wanted to turn it into advantage. Marco, Lorenzo sharply. Not everything becomes currency. Their argument turned into a rapid exchange. Marco listing uses, Lorenzo countering with risks. It lasted 6 lines and moved like a sharp hurry of hands. "We leak a line." Marco, "We force them to make a move. We see who reveals themselves. We don't burn people's names for headlines." Lorenzo replied, "We can buy safety." Marco, "Not at the cost of someone else's life." Lorenzo answered. The back and forth exposed the split in their thinking. Marco's voice was quick and businesslike. Lorenzo's low and controlled. In the argument, I saw how decisions would be made with or without me. The confrontation forced me to act to claim a sliver of authority. I stood and walked to the table. The motion felt deliberate. I smoothed the letter flat and then folded again along a new crease. "Put it in a separate box," I said. "Label it. Mark it to read on my terms. Do not use it as leverage." My sentence was short. Marco barked. "Elena, this is not a domestic dispute." But I cut him off. "I know what it is," I said, "but I'm the one who files these. If you want to move them, you move them only because I say so." My voice trembled but did not break. I felt the small authority of my ritual return and make a space for choice. Marco's jaw worked. Rosa looked at me as if expecting me to back down. I did not. Lorenzo simply nodded once and issued orders to prepare the inner vault for movement. He did not tell them to ignore my request. He made the action respected. Outside the vault, they carried boxes like a small convoy. I walked between them and kept my hand on the boxes as if proof that I belonged in the chain of custody. Rosa followed and kept the towel tray balanced. Marco checked every lock he could reach. Lorenzo walked ahead and looked for traces, scuff marks, damp footprints, a cigarette butt. He catalogued danger with his eyes because he knew threats arrived in details. We found one such detail near the gate. A scrap of paper with a courier's stamp. Marco picked it up with a gloved finger. They filmed the parcels from the gate, then followed the courier to the market. Marco. His voice catalogued facts like a ledger. Someone inside gave them a lead. The evidence centered suspicion back inside the household. I thought of the early chapters when they shoved me into the back seat and yanked the last envelope from my fingers. That memory was a small, sharp engine that had run under my filing for months. Now the new evidence made me test that memory. Did I misfile intention as betrayal? The letter's line suggested so. The twist rearranged the archive and made me question who had access to my lists. Marco suggested locking the box in a safe deposit off-site. "We put it where only we can reach it," he said. Lorenzo shook his head. "Off-site is a leak." He said, "We keep it here and make sure only 2 people have the key." The negotiation continued. Rosa waited for my decision and said, "Elena should mark it." Her sentence was soft, but it carried weight because she had seen me sort my days into small rituals. I took the pen and wrote a new label. The paper smelled like wet ink. My handwriting was small and precise. I wrote, "Confession, read after I say." Then I added a date and my initials. The act felt both childish and decisive. Marco grunted. "You can't keep it sealed forever," he said. "Enemies will return." I looked at the men who had broken the door. I looked at the torn edge of the letter. The risk was real. In the minutes that followed, we cleaned the broken shelf and repacked the boxes. We tested the locks and counted the seals. The team moved like a machine that also carried ragged human edges. Rosa tucked the letter into the separate box and slid the lid down with a hand that trembled less than mine. Lorenzo put the heavy gold ring of his signet over the box and set his glove beside it. He did not lock it in a safe deposit. He brought it to the windowsill and set it where the morning light would hit paper. I asked him, quietly, "Why are you doing this for me?" I expected a terse answer about leverage or control. Instead, he sat on the edge of the desk and touched the planter's rim with a thumb. "Because you did not deserve to carry a lie alone," he said. His voice carried the same tiredness I felt when I filed for the 100th time. He did not promise to fix everything. He promised a practical thing, presence. There was one small surprising moment after the cleanup. Rosa found, wedged under the desk, a scrap of a different letter, a postmarked corner with a name I did not expect. I read the corner and then asked aloud, "When did this arrive?" Rosa couldn't say. Marco traced a line on the paper and narrowed his eyes. The scrap revealed that someone had been copying the boxes for longer than a week. That revelation changed our sense of how immediate the danger was. The twist forced a decision. Marco wanted to use the scrap to bait the intruders. Lorenzo wanted to fortify the vault and change routes. I wanted to keep the confession box on the windowsill, where Dawn would touch it and where I could decide when to read it. My choice was small but important. It was a reclaiming of the habitual act that had been my shield. I labeled the box carefully and set it on the windowsill. The light from the window hit the paper and left a warm edge on the topmost envelope. I sat at the desk and wrote a single note to myself on the planner's blank page. "Read when you are ready." The pen left a dark line. Just before Lorenzo left the room to give orders and tighten security, he paused. He picked up my fountain pen and ran his thumb along the scratched cap. He did not make a show of it. He handed it back and said, "Do not let them make this decision for you." Marco snapped his coat on and grunted that they would increase perimeter checks and assign a courier we trusted. Rosa wrapped a towel around the stacked boxes and said she would stay with the house throughout the day. We had resolved the immediate crisis. The intruders were repelled, the confession was secured, and the boxes were moved deeper into the house. My small act, filing the confession separately and marking it, had shifted the balance. It was not a grand victory, but it was a private assertion. I had turned avoidance into an action that protected not only my memory but other people's safety. When Lorenzo finally stood, he placed his palm on the small of my back, a practiced, measured gesture he used earlier in quiet moments to guide rather than to seize. It held no command, only an anchor. "We will keep watch. We will find who broke the gate," I answered. "Thank you." Because there were few better words in that room, and because the gratitude was specific. I left the vault and placed the labeled box on the windowsill, where Dawn fell across the page. I wrote my note and closed the planner. Rosa stood near the door and folded the towels into neat squares. Marco paced once and then marched to the corridor, calling names and setting new patrols. Lorenzo lingered a moment longer at the window, his silhouette black against the amber wash. He did not reach for the letter. He only made sure it rested where I had left it. The final concrete beat came as I held the box and slid it into the sunlight. I felt the weight of the paper and the small trembling of my hands. I did not announce any grand vow. I filed the confession differently and I marked it to read later. That decision was not a speech, it was a physical action. It was the quiet reclaiming of a ritual I had used to avoid pain, turned now into a way to keep the truth safe until I could meet it. Outside, a car door closed and footsteps faded down the drive. Inside, the study smelled of ink and lemon polish and the faint smoke that clung to Lorenzo's coat. The windowsill held the labeled box and my note. I slid the planner into my bag, clipped my pen onto the spine, and tucked the locket at my throat. I turned the lamp off and left the room with the knowledge that the papers existed in a place I chose, not a place chosen for me. That was the end of the chapter's small conflict. The archive remained intact, the attackers gone, and one new truth filed where I could read it on my own terms. The day began with a knock and ended with a labeled box on the windowsill.